Chapter 20. The Twin Moth-Bodied Chi-Styled Ming-Chi Discs. In the forest at the end of the valley, a series of dull, thunderous roars echoed through the air, thundering reverberations that didn't seem to match the cloudless, sunny midday sky, making everyone's hearts sink. We had just crawled out of the ancient tomb, only to be met with some new mystery. Listening closely, the sound seemed less like thunder. It grew closer, almost like some immense beast charging through the valley. Its heavy steps combined with the impact of its body against the trees mimicked the continuous roar of thunder, interspersed with the barking of dogs. It was then I noticed 3 of our hunting hounds were missing among the 5 sprawled on the ground. The giant mastiffs were nowhere to be seen. We had been too worn out to pay attention to the dogs earlier. Perhaps given our prolonged absence, the dogs had gone hunting in turn. What kind of wild animal had the mastiffs chased to cause such commotion? Ingzi listened carefully and then laughed it off, suggesting they were just corralling a wild boar. "Let's go to the hillside and watch the excitement," she said. "Soon we'll be feasting on wild boar meat." Climbing halfway up the slope, we already saw the aftermath in the trees. A swath of turmoil with trunks knocked asunder. The hounds, no longer content to lie still, fanned out silently, intending to block the boar within the valley. At the mouth of the valley, a towering red pine snapped with a crack, and a massive wild boar emerged from behind it. Its size and tusks made it seem closer to a small elephant without its elongated snout. Weighing perhaps over 1,000 pounds, with dark, long bristles and tusks curved upward like a pair of daggers. These tusks not only served as a proud symbol of its virility, but also signaled its status as the king among the forest boars. Plump of body and thick of limb, it charged forth, churning the earth like a whirlwind as it plunged into the valley. The 3 giant mastiffs trailed behind the enormous wild boar, neither too aggressively nor too distantly, pacing themselves just right as they all moved into the realm of the wild man gully. The boar's hide was almost as tough as a rhino's, and when it wasn't busy running through the forest, it enjoyed rubbing its hefty body against pine trees, both to relieve an itch and to coat itself with sap, a natural insect repellent. In the deep mountain woodlands, the mosquitoes can grow as large as small birds, where it's said humorously, 3 mosquitoes make a dish. Though exaggerated, even the sturdy oxen can't withstand the bites of these giant mosquitoes. Yet the wild boar remains unfazed, its hide like a layer of iron armor impervious to their attacks. Its formidable tusks and significant body weight serve as its primary tools of defense and offense in the forest, making it untouchable even to tigers, bears, and leopards. However, the hunters trained mastiffs have their own strategies for dealing with wild boars. Despite their size, similar to that of young calves, they still appeared minuscule compared to the massive boar. The trio of mastiffs intended to chase the boar deeper into the valley to confront it, for the dense forest with its large trees hampered their maneuverability, and the boar, when charging, was much like a tank. In Wildman Gully, the valley floor was covered with a thick layer of fallen leaves. The mammoth wild boar hadn't gotten halfway when, due to its own heaviness, its limbs sank into the leaf pile. The 3 giant mastiffs surrounded it, biting here and there, wearing down the boar's strength and spirit. The other 5 large hunting dogs stayed on the periphery, not daring to compete with the mastiffs for the kill, content to yip and cheer from the sidelines. Frantic and infuriated, the boar struggled clumsily among the leaves, mustering all its strength for a leap, managing to pull free. But this was the moment the mastiffs had been waiting for. As the boar soared to its highest point, the largest mastiff lunged like a fired cannonball, striking the boar with precise force and angle, flipping it over belly up onto the soft bed of dead branches and decaying leaves. The remaining 2 mastiffs wasted no time in pouncing on the wild boar's belly, a known weak spot where they fiercely tore away. The belly and the rear were the only areas vulnerable on a wild boar. Once exposed, it was all over, especially facing the lion-like ferocity and agility of the mastiffs. In a matter of seconds, the boar's entrails and vital organs were strewn about by the savage dogs. We 3 observed the wild boar meeting its end and made our way slowly down the hillside. Impressed by the mastiff's coordinated attack and tactical use of the terrain, Fatty and I couldn't resist the urge to pat the mastiffs on the head as a reward, beckoning them over with grins. Unexpectedly, the mastiffs and hunting dogs bypassed us and gathered around Ingzi, who had taken out some dried meat to feed them. Delighted by her attention, they wagged their tails to please her. Fatty and I shot each other a look of amused resignation. I shook my head and sighed, damn. It's like our friendly gestures have been snubbed by cold dog butts. Fatty, huffing with indignation, said, Old who? Remember what Mr. Lu soon said? Pa, these opportunistic dogs. Dogs behave just like that. They look down on people and don't recognize their owners. Their disloyalty, we shouldn't take it to heart. Fatty went back to the tent area to fetch a knife, hoe, and hunting rifle. He returned to assisting Z with butchering the wild boar, while I, shouldering the hunting rifle, took two of the large dogs to find a spot on the hillside facing the Great Prairie to bury the child Ming-Chi, to prevent them from haunting us any further. Ingzi asked, Who, are you hungry? Why don't you eat something before you go? I declined, no need. Good meals come to those who wait. I'll just remain hungry a bit longer. It'd feel a bit creepy to be burying the dead at night. With the help of the two large dogs, dragging the children wrapped in the army tunic, I dug a deep hole at the mountain pass overlooking the prairie. My entrenching tool lost in the tomb. Using the hoe was backbreaking work. By the time the sun tipped towards the west, I had barely dug a meter, sweat pouring from me and my stomach grumbling. Looking at the 1-meter deep hole, I figured it was deep enough. After all, these were just kids, and there was no need for a deep grave. Their bodies were filled with mercury, so there was little worry about insects or rodents. So, I took the children out of their military coat wrappings, then neatly bundled them again in 2 army tunics and laid them side by side in the pit. With folded hands, I offered a silent prayer. Little friends from ancient times, it's unfortunate you couldn't experience a modern, civilized, and sunny society filled with social care. But that's the way fate works, so no need to cling to this world. Whatever happens is meant to be and shouldn't be forgotten. With life's end, you should rest in peace. Without proper rest, one becomes a zombie. We don't have the conditions for a proper burial with coffins or ceremonial offerings, but I promise to burn more paper money for you when I get back. I hope you reach the Western paradise swiftly and won't bother us again. We're quite busy as well and can only offer you this much. Remember, greed and endless desires are not the traits of good kids. After finishing, the large dogs and I shoveled the earth back into the hole, completing the burial of the 2 ill-fated children. Looking back over the landscape toward the blood-red sun setting on the horizon, I was overwhelmed with emotion. It was getting late, and Ingzi called me to return. With the dogs, I went back to our camp on the hillside. Fatty had plugged the ventilation holes the pig-faced bats used to sneak attack our horses with a large stone, securing them firmly. The fire was cooking wild boar meat. The pot was bubbling with a mix of pork offal, mushrooms, and woodier fungi. The scent of pine resin mingled with the aroma of meat wafted towards us, and I eagerly rushed over to carve a piece and stuffed it into my mouth. After the meal, we sipped tea brewed from tea bricks Ingzi had prepared, discussing our return. Without our pack horses, the journey back to the camp seemed daunting. With no way to carry our pots, pans, and tents, and without being able to take back the animal pelts we'd hunted along the way, the loss seemed significant. Ingzi then had an idea. Send 2 dogs back with a message, asking people from the village to organize a horse team to come and excavate the Guangdong Army's fortress. There were too many valuable things here to leave behind, and the dogs would make excellent guides for the villagers. In the meantime, we would find a safe place nearby to stay and wait for everyone to arrive. Given the circumstances, that was our only option. Fatty, seemingly indifferent to the urgency, took out the 2 jade discs to examine them. I chided him, You're hopeless, can't even wait for daylight. Put those jades away. You keep staring at them as if they might vanish. I'll keep them safe for now. He held the jade discs up to my face, a puzzled look plastered across his features. Old who, are these the same ones we took from the ancient tomb? Look, do you see something odd about them? Since we obtained the jade discs, I hadn't thoroughly examined them. Now Fatty, with an exaggerated sense of shock, handed them to me, Why has the color changed again? As I took a closer look, indeed, the jades were carved into a moth-like shape, vivid with every detail, decorated with perplexing animal designs that didn't seem to exist in reality. A plump form, somewhat like a lean lion without scales or maybe a scaleless dragon, complete with a few claws and a curly tail. It wasn't clear if these markings were animals, clouds, or waves. The craftsmanship on the disc's body wasn't as refined as the sculpting, merely some simple lines, yet it possessed an unpretentious charm. Sometimes simplicity itself can be beautiful. It was utterly baffling. I remember when we first retrieved them from the coffin. The jade discs were a deep green. Inside the Guangdong Army's fortress, they looked pale yellow, but now they were a deep amber hue. Changing colors several times within a day made us wonder. Could there be such a thing as color-changing jade in the world? Unfamiliar with antiques, it seems we'll have to seek out Gold Tooth, a well-known antique dealer in Beijing, to enlighten us. Talking about this tomb raiding operation, it really didn't go smoothly. The hardships of the journey aside, the ancient tomb in the upper parts of the Wild Man Gully, apparently a general's tomb, disappointingly yielded very few burial objects of worth. The only items that might be of value were the twin moth-bodied Qi-styled Ming-Qi discs, and to procure them, we nearly paid with our lives. The difficulty of the undertaking cannot be understated. Akin to moving mountains and crossing seas, deep chasms covered with a thin layer of ice signify its danger. If the appraisal didn't assign much value to them, I would seriously have considered finding a place to quite literally knock my head against a wall. This experience has been a lesson. The tombs of the nobility are not always filled with abundant precious funeral objects. One must understand the historical and cultural context of the tombs and possess as much knowledge in antique appraisal as possible. Thus we can aim accurately and make sure not to miss any opportunities. Fatty, however, seemed pretty confident. He bet with me that the twin moth-bodied Qi-styled Ming-Qi discs were worth at least 30 to 40,000 yuan and might even be cultural relics of national importance. His dream was not to sell to buyers from Hong Kong or Taiwan, but directly to the Forbidden City Museum. He imagined the government being so pleased that they'd reward us handsomely, maybe even with a house in Beijing or inviting us to give speeches around the country. After the speech, he fancied touching female university students running up to present flowers and love letters. I told him to stop dreaming. Were we even eligible for a model workers' meeting? Being out of the clinker was lucky enough. However, should we indeed obtain 30 to 50,000 yuan as Fatty suggested, it would be an unexpected windfall. Selling tapes across the country, we would be fortunate to net 3 to 4,000 yuan a year. During slower business years, after deducting food and accommodations expenses, we hardly made anything. I had been awake for 2 days and, after a hearty meal and casual chat with Fatty, I promptly fell asleep. With the hunting dogs on guard, I had no fear of animal attacks and slept soundly. However, in my dreams, I found myself back on a smoky battlefield surrounded by the faces of my subordinates. Each face young and floating without bodies, bleeding ceaselessly, gradually ascending into the sky while I lay on the ground futilely trying to grasp them, unable to move. The night passed without incident. The large bats that inhabited the underground seemed to have vanished. Perhaps they were frightened by the gunshot and had gone to find a new cavern to settle in. I slept soundly and only waked up at noon. Ingzi had already sent 3 hunting dogs back with messages. Each dog carried a little leather pouch around its neck containing notes from Fatty, instructing the villagers to bring more people and tools, and if possible, some explosives for digging in Wild Man's Gully where the remnants of the Guangdong Army's luxury items were expected to be found. We dined on wild boar meat for lunch, and then moved our camp closer to the entrance of the mountain valley. We set up our tent behind a wind-blocking boulder at the edge of the forest and the grassland, an easily locatable spot for the people coming from the village. Afterward, Ingzi took the dogs to gather wild vegetables, and I dug a stove in the ground, setting a pot over it to boil water. We had brought some flour with us, and Fatty took charge, making a meal of dumplings stuffed with precious mushrooms and wild boar meat as a celebration of our initial success. Although it had been a close call, at least none of us had suffered any mishaps, and we had managed to gain something, especially as the Guangdong Army stronghold had plenty of supplies which would be of great help to the lives of the villagers. For this reason alone, it was worth toasting to our success. For over 10 days, we continued hunting with the dogs, and I felt that I was becoming a true hunter of the hills. Eventually, people from the village arrived, over 40 in number, led by the village head and the accountant. With most men working in Neoshin Mountain, the group was composed mainly of women, girls, and older children. The local stock of horses was limited, no more than 10. So hearing about the mountain of foreign items we had potentially found, they brought along donkeys and mules in addition to their hunting dogs, and thus the noisy procession entered. For over 10 days. We continued hunting with the dogs, and I felt that I was becoming a true hunter of the hills. Eventually, people from the village arrived, over 40 in number, led by the village head and the accountant. With most men working in Neoshin Mountain, the group was composed mainly of women, girls, and older children. The local stock of horses was limited, no more than 10. So hearing about the mountain of foreign items we had potentially found, they brought along donkeys and mules in addition to their hunting dogs, and thus the noisy procession entered Black Wind Pass. Everyone was eager to get to work, but I suggested we rest for the day after such a tiresome journey and start fresh the next morning. Besides, we couldn't proceed without planning. With my engineer background, I volunteered to allocate tasks. We needed to employ operational research, making plans and taking systematic action rather than working chaotically. Despite the crowd's excited and restless chatter, my words were drowned out until the secretary stepped up, shouting for quiet and echoing my sentiment. The collection from the Guangdong Army stronghold was due to the efforts of Fatty, Ingzi, and myself, he declared. Whatever we said was as significant as an organizational directive. Once I reiterated my instructions for everyone to set up their tents, cook, and rest, I spoke with the village head and the accountant. Without explosives, opening up the underground stronghold from the direction of the general's tomb wouldn't be too difficult. 5 people could clear the collapsed burial chamber in just half a day. However, we had to be prepared for wild animals within the fortress, which are generally afraid of fire. So we needed to carry plenty of torches. It was important to remind that no one was to act alone once inside, and nothing was to be taken except necessary living supplies, such as overcoats, Japanese boots, blankets, generators, cables, and wires. We'd take as much as we could carry, then seal up the stronghold without leaking any news. Otherwise, we'd be required to hand over our finds. The village head assured me with a slap on his chest, "My nephew, rest easy. Once these folks take their share, their lips are sealed." Everyone's learned their lesson after the earthquake when many people went to Neoshin Mountain to find treasures, only to have them confiscated by the Bureau of Cultural Heritage when they showed up. We've all become wiser. Even if you put a gun to their heads, they won't spill. Besides, our village is so remote that strangers barely visit once a year. This time, we'll all make a fortune quietly. That evening we cooked our pots and settled in for the night. Early the next morning, I divided the more than 40 ants, young ladies, and kids into 4 groups. The first group, comprised of the youngest, went hunting in the mountains led by Ingzi. The opposite group, consisting of the oldest, stayed behind in the camp to cook for everyone under the accountant's supervision. Fatty and I each led a group of younger and stronger individuals to take turns digging out the general's collapsed tomb, under the overall direction of the village head. The villagers had brought a variety of tools, spades, shovels, and some even brought hoes that were overkill for our needs. I divided my 10-person group in 2, one half to excavate the collapsed glazed tiles, while the other was tasked with moving the dug-out dirt and debris. The project progressed in an orderly manner. Suddenly, out of nowhere, dark clouds appeared, bringing a sudden lightning storm and hail. Chaos ensued as everyone ran to the tents at the valley entrance to escape the ice barrage. After returning to camp and accounting for everyone, 3 people were missing besides the hunting party. Weather in the wilderness can change in an instant. Hailstorms had been known to be deadly to both people and animals, so everyone fled while shielding their heads with whatever they could find. In the commotion, it was inevitable some could lose their direction. However, my biggest concern were the so-called peat bogs rumored to be in the Wild Man's Gully. Since our arrival, we've been careful, but we hadn't encountered any sign of these peat bogs, growing somewhat complacent over the days. If we were to inadvertently encounter one and become trapped inside, not even deities could escape. I told the village head, let's check who exactly is missing and which group they were in. That will help us deduce their last known location, and then I can take a few people to search for them. The village head said, "Ah, my clever nephew has a good head on his shoulders. I get so nervous in these situations that my mind goes blank. Let's have the accountant check which three are missing." As the group settled down from the hailstorm's panic, the hail itself stopped. Though the hail fell fiercely, it came and went quickly. A strong wind arose, dispersing the dark clouds above, and fierce mountain winds howled, blowing leaves all around in Wild Man's Gully and causing a sudden drop in temperature. The accountant went from tent to tent for a roll call, and finally came to report to me and the village head, "Uncle, 3 people are missing. Bailing, Guelon, these 2 girls, and Old Wong's second daughter-in-law. What should we do? Let's quickly take the dogs and go look for them." These 3 were from Fatty's group. Since it wasn't their turn to work yet, they were gathered together, 2 on the east side of the gully, 3 on the west, chatting away. When the weather turned, everyone ran back and no one noticed them missing. The village head said, "These 3 really stir up trouble. I told them not to come. They insisted on coming, and now look, they've just added to the chaos. Nephew Hu, what do you think we should do? Shall we search together?" I replied, "The hail and rain came down too fiercely just now. They might have run somewhere to take shelter. We shouldn't send too many people. It won't help, and we might end up with even more missing. Let me take 4 or 5 people who are used to walking the mountain trails to look for them. I've lived in Wild Man's Gully for half a month now and am familiar with the landscape. You don't need to worry, just stay calm at the camp. It's getting colder. Ask the sisters to brew some ginger soup to keep everyone warm." The village head slapped his thigh in agreement. "That's settled then." Fatty and I took 5 villagers who were used to traversing mountain ranges and started our search from the ancient tomb in the center of Wild Man's Gully. Most hunting dogs were taken by Ingzi into the mountains to hunt since we needed a significant amount of food and meat to feed nearly 50 people. With fewer dogs, hunting became more difficult. We needed to leave some dogs to guard the camp against wild animals, so we only took 3 with us, one of which was a hunting dog, and the others were large local guard dogs. The Wild Man's Gully runs north to south, with the vast outer Mongolian grasslands to the north, where our camp was located, and to the south. It connects to vast mountains and pristine forests. At that time, a strong wind was blowing into the gully. We followed the wind, but the dog's sense of smell was not as sharp due to it. Leading the search party, we called out as we walked all the way to the southern exit of Wild Man's Gully. The trees here were dense, all birch and larch. Aside from our shouting, footsteps, and the dogs barking, there was only the sound of the howling wind. The silence was unnerving, creating an eerie atmosphere. It felt as though no animals or birds were present, not even the common little squirrels found in the forest, which made the mood incredibly oppressive. 3 enormous Tibetan mastiffs had chased out a large wild boar from here before. Because this patch of forest is so quiet, we had never come to this side for hunting. As I was hesitating, suddenly a hunting dog barked. Releasing the dog, it shot out like an arrow, with us all quickly following close behind. Under a large pine tree, we found the 3 missing women. Bailing and Guelon were both clutching Old Wong's second daughter-in-law, who was in a state of confusion. Seeing us, they urgently called for help. They had heard our shouts earlier, but we hadn't heard them because the wind was blowing in the opposite direction. Old Wong's second daughter-in-law was foaming at the mouth, unconscious. I checked her breathing with my finger. She's fine. Her breathing is steady. She's not poisoned. She likely fainted from fear. She can rest back at camp and should recover soon. How did you end up running here? Did you encounter any wild animals? Bailing explained that while they were waiting to work, they had been chatting casually in Wild Man's Gully about trivial matters such as which young man looked impressive or which girl was dark-skinned. As they chatted animatedly, the initially clear sky suddenly darkened with clouds. Before they had a chance to look up and notice, a severe hailstorm struck. None of the 3 had hunters in their families, as they were all farmers by trade, and used to the deep woods and lacking experience. In their panic to find shelter from the hail, they unwittingly ran in the wrong direction and ended up on the southern side. Guilin added that Old Wang's second daughter-in-law, who was a few years older than both of them, was normally addressed respectfully as second sister-in-law by them in the village. When the hail started, she followed her lead. Initially too busy shielding their heads, they didn't notice their surroundings. But as they ran, they sensed something was off. After the hail stopped and they looked around, all they saw were trees. Other than the three of them, there was no one in sight. The dense trees looked like a canopy, dark and shading the sun. And the mountain wind carried leaves flying about like snowflakes, creating a frightening scene. That's when she asked the second sister-in-law if they had run in the wrong direction and whether they should turn back. The second sister-in-law, too, felt something was amiss. She said that suddenly, it had gotten dark, and she had seen some people running in this direction. Almost all were men, though she hadn't seen their faces clearly. Dazed by the hail, she hadn't thought much about it and just followed the figures. Eventually, except for her two sisters, everyone else had disappeared, and that's when she started to feel scared. Suddenly, they stumbled upon a curious sight beneath an old tree. A circle of hundreds of men, all squatting side by side, so only their backs were visible. What were all these men doing? The girls had heard tales of valuable medicinal herbs found in the mountains, such as ginseng, polygonatum, and lingji, especially ginseng, which had various names like divine herb, earth spirit, heavenly dog, club. These herbs grew deep in the mountains, and very old ginseng, referred to as old heavenly dog, were believed to become animated, capable of transforming into a stout young boy or a young girl. It was said that if one encountered a top-grade old mountain ginseng, they mustn't exclaim their find but use code words like two-horn, lantern, or three-flower palm. Otherwise, the ginseng spirit, upon hearing its discovery, would vanish into the earth. It was believed one should quietly tie a red thread around it, wait until nighttime when it slept to dig it up, making offerings to the mountain god and bathing before the endeavor, and only then could the extracted ginseng be wrapped in red cloth and taken home. Curious whether these men were digging for ginseng and why there'd be so much ginseng, one of the women, against the timid protests of Bailing and Gillen, approached to inquire. She tapped on the shoulder of one man and asked, "Big brother, what are you all doing?" Whatever she saw next caused her to scream and faint. When Bailing and Guilin rushed to assist her, the men under the tree had vanished, as if they had evaporated into the forest air. Bailing told me, "Brother who, then you guys arrived. It scared us to death. We saw ghosts in broad daylight. Those people, all squatting there, not sure what they were doing. And then they were gone in a blink of an eye." I called over to Fatty, and we went to investigate the spot Bailing mentioned. The ground was covered in fallen leaves, with autumn half over and nearly on the cusp of deep fall. The birch leaves rustled in the wind, but there was no sign of the hundreds of men. As we searched, we knew if there was something amiss, we needed to find out quickly to prevent any threat to the others. Fatty stumbled and cursed as he fell, thinking he had tripped over a root. When he touched it, it didn't feel like one. Upon inspection, what he thought was a root he threw away in dread. "Oh my God, it's a human thigh." His exclamation sounded so odd that I went over to take a look. It turned out to be a bone from a human arm. I inspected the place where Fatty had fallen, and there were more bones protruding from the soil. It seemed Fatty had broken the arm bone that was sticking out when he stumbled onto it. I sent 2 people to escort Bailing and the others back to the camp, and continued with the rest of the group to dig into the soil with the bayonet ends of our hunting rifles. It didn't take long before we uncovered a large number of human bones. Fatty turned to me and said, "My God, there are so many? Could these be the laborers the Guandong army used to build their underground fortress, all killed and buried here in this forest in a mass grave? Were those things Guilin and the others saw actually ghosts?" A chilling mountain wind blew through, and a wave of goosebumps spread among us. Skeletons were piled on top of one another within the soil. We had only dug up a small patch beneath the layer of fallen leaves, and the number of bones was already uncountable. The bones bore clear marks of violent death, with clearly visible cuts on ribs, neck bones, and skulls, and numerous separated skulls among them, obviously severed by a blade. There are many legends about Black Wind Pass, But the most famous is probably the battle at the end of the Jin dynasty and the beginning of the Yuan dynasty, where the Mongols decisively defeated the main force of the Jin soldiers. Hundreds of thousands of Jin soldiers were piled into a mountain of corpses, and the Mongolians hastily threw their bodies into Wild Man's Gully, allegedly filling the entire valley. As a battlefield that has lasted nearly 1,000 years, those remains from that time would have already decomposed into the soil and air. The white bones scattered throughout the forest were unlikely to be remnants of that era. The Black Wind Pass battle between Jin and Yuan is historically the only large-scale battle to have taken place on this land. It wasn't until the later secretive stationing of the Guangdong army that there had been no other known battles. Considering the historical context, as Comrade Lenin once said regarding the analysis of any problem, the absolute demand from a Marxist perspective is to place it within a definite historical category. Fatty suspected the large number of bones in the forest belonged to Chinese laborers killed by the Guangdong army, a hypothesis fully aligned with Lenin's criteria. But one detail puzzled us. How was it that a skeletal arm was protruding halfway from the ground? If this hand had been exposed at the time the Guangdong army buried the corpses, scavengers would certainly have dug up and consumed the bodies long ago. Or could it be? It deliberately extended from the ground to trip Fatty, ensuring we would discover them? The thought sent shivers down my spine. I dared not dwell on it further, instructing everyone to refill the dug-up dirt, and then we hurriedly returned to camp to discuss our next steps with the village head. We hurried back to the camp on the other side of the valley, where Ingzi and her team had just returned from hunting in the mountains. Despite the hailstorm, they had managed to hunt down several roe deer, a brown bear, and some wild roe, providing enough food for the people and the hunting dogs for the next 3 or 4 meals. Several older women were busy cooking, some were resting, and others gathered in a tent to visit old Wang's second daughter-in-law, who by then had regained consciousness and was recounting her experience in the forest to the village head while sipping some hot ginger soup. So I walked up closer. Right? Oh my. You won't guess what happened next. You wouldn't believe what I saw. It was so scary. The village head, growing impatient with her dramatic storytelling, urged her. What kind of tale are you weaving now? Singing Beijing opera or recounting tales of the water margin, like Liang Shan's Little Five Righteous Heroes? Skip the unnecessary guessing and tell us something useful. Old Wang's second daughter-in-law, a woman known for her forthrightness, shot the village head a glance. What's the hurry? I was just getting to the point. Where was I? Oh, right. You want to know what happened? So, there was this group of men squatting down, looking all scruffy, and I thought they might be digging for ginseng or something. They seemed to be bowing to a big tree. What's with bowing to a tree? Is IIT some kind of bodhisattva, or what? I reached out and tapped one of them on the back to ask what they were doing, and guess what? The village head became exasperated. Oh, for heaven's sake. Why did old Wang II marry such a woman? You're driving me mad. It's like pulling teeth with you. Let Wang II deal with you. Afraid the two might continue to bicker, I signaled Ing Zi, who quickly understood and deflected the conversation, grasping the hand of old Wang's daughter-in-law, sister-in-law. Tell us, what happened next? What did you see? She replied, well, he was squatting there, right? And when he turned around, oh God, he had no head. And then I got scared and fainted. And then when I woke up, I found myself in this tent, with Bailing giving me soup to drink, and then I started telling you all what happened, the whole sequence of events. The women around us were spooked, and after hearing her tale, they too began to murmur among themselves. The village head quickly stood up and declared, enough about ghosts and spirits. We are immersed in the spring breeze of reform and opening up, soaking up the sunlight of the joint production contract responsibility system. Under the broad daylight and clear sky, no one should spout nonsense. I took the village head out of the tent to a secluded spot and shared with him everything I had seen and heard in the forest. Upon hearing this, the village head began to weep. Many laborers from our village were taken by the Japanese back then, and not one returned. My own second uncle was one of those taken. Some say he was sent by the Guangdong army to Hokkaido in Japan to mine coal. Others say he was with a group of laborers sent to the greater Shingon range to construct fortifications. We never got any concrete information on where exactly he went. He is gone without a trace. neither alive nor found dead. My grandmother went blind from crying, always hoping he would come back, a hope she took to her grave. Among those bones buried in the forest, there might be our fellow villagers. And even if not, they are still our fellow Chinese. It doesn't sit right with my conscience to ignore this. Besides, if the resentment of these souls is too strong and their spirits remain unappeased, it'll scare everyone, and we won't be able to collect the relics left by the Guangdong army. Nephew, do you think we should excavate and reinter them? I tried to console him, explaining that there wasn't much we could do given our capabilities. It was almost impossible, just like at Pingding Mountain where a mass burial site of victims of the invading Japanese army was found. Trying to individually identify and properly reinter each set of remains is almost an unthinkable task, as many of the bones are disarticulated and intermingling. It's also a disrespectful act to the deceased to pair one person's head with another's body haphazardly. Moreover, we didn't come all this way, rallying the people just to leave empty-handed. I suggested that we hold a memorial service in the forest with incense, food, and drink, and later erect a monument to commemorate them. Wiping his tears and mucus with his sleeve, the village head agreed, "Yes, that's the right thing to do. Once we return to the village, we'll bring in a few lamas from the banners to perform sutra recitations to liberate their souls, so they may find peace quickly." I once firmly disbelieved in ghosts until recently when I realized something important. Nothing is certain not to exist in this world. A hunter may venture up the mountain all day and catch nothing, but this does not conclude there are no wild beasts in the mountains. Our life experiences, compared to the vastness of the universe, are inconsequential, and we should hold a healthy reverence for the unknown parts of the world. Even if ghosts and spirits are not to blame, the remains of those who died in the forest deserve our sympathy. No matter how we look at it, it's necessary to do something for them. Following the incident with Old Wang's second daughter-in-law, the villagers had grown superstitious, suspecting ghosts and spirits all around. This place felt cursed, full of mystery, and we couldn't afford to linger at Black Wind Pass for much longer without risking more strange occurrences. After lunch, I instructed Fatty to continue leading two groups to excavate the Guangdong Army's fortress, aiming to uncover a passage by evening. The accountant stayed in camp to prepare dinner with a few of the older women and to watch over the mules, horses, and supplies. Meanwhile, the village head, Ing Zi, and I picked a few brave souls and took some homemade liquor from the village, as well as some dried meat, to the southern end of Wild Man's Gully's forest to pay tribute to the souls of those laborers. By then, the wind had stopped and the forest was silent. We laid out the food and drink on the ground. Lacking incense, we inserted a few cigarettes in the soil as an offering. The village head, crying and sniffling, made vows and swore that the little devils had long been chased off, and on returning home, he would ensure lamas were called to pray for the repose of the spirits and erect a memorial stone for them. I realized then that of all the people in our village, it was the village head who was the most superstitious. He talked on and on without end. As I stood there smoking, waiting, I noticed something extraordinary about this part of the forest. The trees here were not as lush as those in a virgin forest, significantly lacking in comparison. Most bizarre, though, was the sight of several withered old locust trees among the mainly pine and birch forest. Locust trees, especially the thorny locust common in the northeastern regions, were nearly absent in the forests near the China-Mongolia border. A locust tree's characteristics are considered to be the darkest. This is reflected in its name, which combines the Chinese characters for wood and ghost. If a locust tree dies, the darkness associated with it intensifies. According to the 16-character Yin-Yang Feng Shui secret techniques, one of the 16 characters is suppress. It states that around a tomb, one should never have trees like dead locusts or willows, lest the deceased's spirit becomes embroiled in Yin energy, unable to escape and confined within several miles of the dead locust tree. In ancient times, after killing an enemy, some would bury their foe's corpse next to a dead locust tree to prevent their spirit from being reborn. In a hurry, I counted the locust trees around us. There were 7 dead locust trees in total, arranged in the pattern of the Big Dipper. It was unclear if they had grown naturally or if someone with knowledge of Yin and Yang had planted them intentionally. No wonder the second daughter-in-law from old Wang's household saw those spirits squatting beneath the trees. Undoubtedly, these souls were trying to escape this forest during the changing of heaven and earth, but ultimately could not. I explained the situation to the village head and hurriedly suggested that we should cut down these dead locust trees. I quickly organized the group to start cutting down the trees. Despite lacking proper equipment, the job was made easier as the locust trees were already dead and brittle. In no time at all, we felled all 7 trees, and the village head was particularly pleased. We then poured out our liquor into the earth and laid out offerings of wild fruits, apricots, deer, and rabbit meat. After a moment of silent tribute, Ingzi and I dug some fire breaks and set the locust trees ablaze. Flames surged high, and the dry wood cracked eerily, giving off billows of black smoke with such a pungent smell that everyone covered their noses and stood back, stepping in only when sparks flew out of the fire breaks to extinguish them. Lighting a fire in the forest is risky. If not managed carefully, it could lead to a wildfire. So we all watched tensely until the fire died down, then covered the ashes with soil to prevent any chance of reignition. After the busy work was done and evening drew near, we returned to the center of Wildman's Gully to find that Fatty and the others had already opened up the underground fortress. Everyone headed back to camp, relieved to see that old Wang's second daughter-in-law had recovered and was able to walk and eat. Re-energized after a good meal and rest, the next day at first light, we lit pine tar torches. These burn long and are not easily extinguished by the wind, providing plenty of light even in the fortress. With so many Japanese army supplies, far exceeding even his most optimistic estimates, the village head was overjoyed and hurried everyone to gather the relics. The group swiftly packed up bundles of army overcoats, shoes, rainproof cloth, dry batteries, field meal boxes, and more onto the mules and horses to carry them out. In our secluded mountain village, industrial products were particularly scarce, so everyone eagerly collected these valuable items with vigor and energy, reminiscent of the Great Leap Forward era. Ingzi and I, along with a few others, continued searching the other side of the passageway. According to the map, there was an even larger storage area on that side. Guided by the map, it wasn't difficult to find. The door of the warehouse was firmly secured, and it took the strength of a horse to pry it open. Once inside, everyone was struck dumb. Row upon row of artillery pieces, like mountain guns, field cannons, Type 91 howitzers, 60mm mortars, and various sizes of mortars, not to mention ammo boxes stacked like mountains, seemingly without end. It seemed these artillery pieces were ready for mobile warfare. The Japanese army could be divided into 6 segments, including the home forces stationed across the 4 Japanese islands and its colonies such as Taiwan and Korea. These forces were referred to as the home forces. Additionally, there were the forces dispatched to China, known as the China Expeditionary Army, which included the troops that invaded mainland China. There were also the Southern Forces, which operated in Southeast Asia and Australia, complemented by the Navy and Air Force, and finally, the Guandong Army stationed in Manchukuo and Mongolia, comprising the 6 major military territories. Of these, the Guandong Army was the most favored by the Emperor and Imperial headquarters, considered the elite of the elite. The Japanese viewed China's 3 northeastern provinces as even more valuable than their own land due to 3 main reasons. First, the strategic depth of the area. Second, the abundance of resources including vast forests and mineral reserves. And third, the tactical advantage of being able to strike southward into the heart of China. Long before World War II, Japan's infamous Tanaka Memorial laid out their covetous designs on China's northeast, and during the war, the Tanaka Plan suggested holding on to Manchukuo even at the expense of the Japanese home islands, highlighting the importance Japan placed on Manchukuo. Therefore, the supplies and equipment of the Guandong Army were top-notch among the Japanese army, rivaled only by the combined fleet of the Navy. However, the ambitions of militarism have become a laughing matter before the wheels of history, and there's no need to be polite to the Guandong Army now. They certainly weren't kind to us. Everyone rolled up their sleeves and shouted excitedly about carrying everything back. I cautioned them to keep the torches away from the ammo boxes to prevent any explosion. If the munitions were detonated, everyone would be buried alive there. Behind the massive number of artillery pieces were even more large wooden crates, marked with the red steel stamp of Kashima Heavy Industries. Upon prying open a crate, we found it contained small generators, too heavy to carry and impossible for the horses to haul. We would have to disassemble them and carry the parts back slowly. The materials from the underground fortress were continuously transported for an entire day, but we had managed to retrieve less than 1% of what was there. The accountant was busy counting everything. This was a windfall. The surpluses could make us a lot of money, as the items were really worth a lot. At dinner, the village head approached me with a concern. Continuing to transport everything would be an endless task, and the horses could not carry so much. With the deep autumn season fast approaching, leaving a team to watch over the site while the other went back to the village with supplies would be arduous. The back-and-forth journey on the mountain roads could take more than half a month. By the time we managed 2 trips, heavy snowfall would block the passes. He suggested we should cover up the entrance to the fortress for now. Everyone could return to the village and wait until next spring to resume the work. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. It had been over a month since we left Beijing, and continually staying in the mountains was impractical. We needed to sell what we had retrieved through Gold Tooth. So, I agreed with the village head's proposal. Next time, Fatty and I might not be able to join them. I entrusted the village head with the task of offering paper money next spring to the twin-child sacrifices at Blackwind Pass. And I stressed, especially, not to tamper with the military supplies in the underground fortress. Those were not for civilian use. The village head understood the reasons and earnestly promised to do so, planning to find llamas to recite prayers for us once we returned to the village, and to also send off the spirits of those 2 children together. To be ready to depart the next day, almost everyone stayed up throughout the night to pack the items. By the time everything was wrapped up, the sun had risen, and thankfully, despite the busyness, no further incidents occurred that night. The journey back was uneventful. Upon our return to Gangang Village, it was like a festival. The families had called back the men working in Noshin Mountain, and every household had pork stew with glass noodles. It was a celebration. In the evening, Fatty and I were seated cross-legged on the Kong, a traditional Chinese heated bed, at Yanzi's house, keeping her father company over some drinks. We had barely had a few cups when we heard someone shouting outside. Even the village's hunting dogs began to bark, and my intuition told me something had happened. A serious incident at that. Stepping outside, we saw the village head going from door to door, rousing the villagers with his knocks. Disaster has struck. The mountain has collapsed at Noshin Mountain, trapping the archaeologists inside. Everyone, grab your tools and let's go save them. I would only learn the details of this event much later. Inside Noshin Mountain, the ancient tombs revealed multiple layers, one below the other. Archaeology isn't as straightforward or as simple as tomb raiding. The archaeological team would dig through one layer and then clear it, which was both time-consuming and labor-intensive. They also had to clear the surrounding pits for chariots, horses, and human sacrifices. It wasn't until they reached the 7th underground level that they discovered the coffin of a royal concubine. China's policy on tomb excavation is protective. Tombs are not actively excavated unless threatened by construction, earthquakes, or looting, in which case archaeologists would perform emergency excavations. The Liao Dynasty tomb in Lama Gully at Noshin Mountain was revealed due to such an earthquake that caused the mountain to split, exposing the underground palace. Over the years, with the work of the archaeological team, more than 3,000 artifacts had been unearthed, and the mystery of the last layer of the royal tomb was about to be revealed. However, just as they opened the 7th layer, the people from our village who had been collecting the Guangdong Army's discarded items returned to Gangang Village to celebrate. They sent for their relatives who were working at the archaeological site, hoping to take a few days off. Normally, with the strict schedule and shortage of workers, leave would not be granted except on holidays. But like the intervention of unseen spirits, because the underground palace had reached the last layer and there wasn't much work left, the manager granted their request, leaving only a dozen members of the archaeological team to clear the 7th layer. The villager workers had hardly left when the mountain collapsed behind them. The year of the earthquake had seen visual changes. The mountain split from the bottom up and the waterfall at the top had dried up. Whether it was due to hollow sections within the mountain that couldn't withstand the pressure and outward forces, or if it was associated with the deep excavation by the workforce, a major disaster occurred, burying the 11 archaeologists who were still inside clearing the burial chamber of the tomb owner. It took half a day for news of the disaster to reach Gangang village. By the time we learned a mountain collapse had trapped many people, we knew that even if we set out for Lama Gully, which was half a day's walk away, we would be too late to save anyone. Yet we couldn't neglect to act, as those buried were comrades sent by the higher-ups to work on the excavation. The village head was busy organizing rescue efforts, at the same time sending someone to notify the medical station in the county. Fatty and I also joined in. We dug at Noshin Mountain for 2 days and 2 nights. Eventually, everyone had to accept the tragic reality. The victims were beyond saving. The leaders from the county also arrived, and upon inspecting the site, they concurred. The only thing left to do was to recover the bodies of those who had perished and give them a proper burial. The timing of the collapse sparked suspicion. It had occurred just after the local workers had left on leave. The majority of them had escaped harm, a stroke of luck amid misfortune. It seemed as if some unseen fate had intervened in the tragedy, the hows and whys of which no one could truly fathom. So, over 50 people continued the slow, laborious effort on the mountain, while the rest, including women, the elderly, and children, returned to the village. After another delay of 3 to 4 days, I no longer wished to stay. Saying goodbye to everyone, Fatty and I headed back to Beijing, a city we had not seen for many days. As soon as we got off the train, we didn't go anywhere else but straight to Panjiayuan. Gold Tooth was just as we remembered him, common in appearance but savvy to the bone, unassuming yet one of the most experienced and knowledgeable traders in Panjiayuan. Seeing us, Gold Tooth hastily dropped what he was doing and bombarded us with questions. "My good sirs, why has it taken you so many days to return? I've been worried sick about you both." Fatty was eager to show the twin moth-bodied chi-styled Ming-Chi discs to Gold Tooth, to finally find out their worth, a matter that had been bothering us for some time. But Gold Tooth quickly signaled with his eyes, indicating that we shouldn't take the items out there. "Let's head over to Dongxi. Remember the place where we had the mutton hot pot last time? It's nice and quiet, a good spot for a talk. Panjiayuan is a mixed bag, lots of people, lots of eyes. It's not the place for discussing our Ming Chi. Wait here for a moment. Let me wrap up this deal and we'll go." When Gold Tooth referred to Ming Chi, he was using the jargon of the trade, which, as previously mentioned, is synonymous with funerary artifacts. The term does not refer to antiques from the Ming dynasty, but specifically to items meant for burial. Such jargon, including terms like antique and vintage, are designed to sound more appealing while disguising the actual provenance, which often has to do with grave digging. In earlier times, such objects would be called bone antiques, or bone playthings, referring to relics from previous dynasties. While talking, Gold Tooth managed to sell off an early Qing dynasty icebox and a Yongzheng imperial kiln-made Zijihong small teapot to a foreigner who was with a Chinese translator. These items were not particularly significant, just minor trades. We didn't see how much he sold them for, but I suspected the foreigner probably got skinned for a tidy sum. After closing the deal and counting the money, Gold Tooth proclaimed boastfully, "It's been 3 days without business, but today's trade is enough to feed me for 3 years. These foolish foreigners, buying fake pieces as if they've struck gold, are going to cry all the way home." Counting his money, he turned back to me and said, "Back in the year of Gengzi, when the 8-Nation Alliance entered Beijing, they plundered plenty from us. Today, I reckon, I'm simply doing heaven's work. Don't you think so, Mr. Hu?" Given that we were relying on Gold Tooth's assistance, we of course went along with him, promptly raising our thumbs to praise him. In the past, there was Hua Yuanjia who defeated the Russian strongman in martial combat. And now we have Gold Tooth, deftly recovering wealth from foreigners, bringing glory to our nation. Brilliant, truly brilliant. We packed up our belongings and once again headed to the small restaurant where we'd first talked. Likely due to his profitable day and our flattery, Gold Tooth was in high spirits. While drinking, he even recited a line from Peking opera in a dramatic flair. "You over there, if you play the foreign devil, I shall whip you with this steel." I surveyed our surroundings. It wasn't the peak time for dining, so the restaurant was quiet, with only our table occupied in the corner. The waiter dozed off at the counter, and a couple of staff responsible for the hot pot squatted by the door, chatting idly. There was no one paying any attention to the three of us. I gestured for Fatty to take the jade discs out so Goldtooth could take a closer look. I also briefly went through the main events of our trip to the Northeast, not getting into too much detail. Goldtooth examined the discs with great attention, occasionally bringing them to his nose to smell and even licking them with his tongue, inquiring about specific details of the tomb they came from. Goldtooth said, "I have some rudimentary knowledge about appraising such items, a family skill passed down through generations. Today, I'll demonstrate this to you both. To appraise an ancient object is like a doctor feeling the pulse. There are aspects to be considered: looking, smelling, asking, and touching, especially for Ming Chi. It differs from other antiques. While collected antiques are often handled and gain a patina over time, Ming Chi are excavated and have been buried in tombs for ages. There are new graves, old graves, waterlogged graves, dirty graves, and stale graves. First, I look at it, observing the craftsmanship, shape, and color. Next is smell, which is crucial for identifying Ming Chi. Some forgers in the South immerse their fakes in pits of excrement to age them, but while that might make them look aged, the smell is off. It's more pungent than a jade plug, used to seal a corpse's orifices, and while it might appear accurately ancient, one sniff can reveal the truth. Then comes asking, where does the item come from and what's its history? A tomb raider will naturally detail the origins of the piece, and I can judge whether their account is true or false, looking for inconsistencies. This can indicate the authenticity and value of the item. Finally, there's the touch. It's a level of understanding beyond words. Countless antiques have passed through my hands. They are connected to my heart. Real antiques are treasures, regardless of size or weight. Just by holding and feeling them, you can sense their weight, and I don't mean just physical mass. Ancient items have a spirituality and a tangible sense of history accumulated over hundreds or thousands of years. That sense cannot be replicated in forgeries, no matter how convincing they might look. Fatty exclaimed, "Goodness, you've said so much, and I haven't understood a single thing. Just tell us, how much are these two Ming Chi worth?" Goldtooth chuckled, "Patience, Fatty. I did go on a bit there, but it was well intended. I hope you two will learn more about antique appraising in the future. The funerary goods from those ancient tombs. Aren't there hundreds, if not thousands of them? It would be difficult to deal with them without some knowledge in this area, wouldn't it? Now, about these two Ming Chi, I can't name them off the top of my head, but let's give them a provisional name. Based on their appearance, we might call them the twin moth-bodied Chi-styled Ming Chi discs. As for their value, he explained that there's no fixed price for antiques, unlike commodities like sugar or coal, and the value of vintage items greatly depends on if there's a buyer and whether they esteem the item. Otherwise, no matter how good the piece is, if there's no buyer, it's worthless. For these two Ming Chi, Goldtooth continued, I would estimate their value, just based on the items themselves, to be between 40 to 50,000 yuan domestically. Of course, their value would undoubtedly be much higher overseas. But that's the going rate here in China. If we find the right buyer, we might get a higher price. It's hard to say. We'll have to see the circumstances of the sale. Fatty was curious and a bit shocked when Goldtooth mentioned that one of his acquaintances from Panjiayuan, who used to deal in trivial items like tiles and arrowheads, had gone to Xinjiang to trade in dry corpses and had made a fortune. Wait, those dry corpses are just mummies, right? How can they be worth money? Goldtooth clarified. To us, they might just be mummified corpses undeserving of attention, but overseas, they're considered treasures. In Beijing, for instance, items from before the Ming Dynasty are priced at 20,000 yuan each, and if taken overseas, they can fetch 100,000 US dollars. Think about it. Foreigners love such mysterious and quaint items. In their eyes, our ancient Oriental country is shrouded in mystery. Imagine an advertisement in New York's Natural History Museum announcing the exhibition of a mysterious Eastern beauty mummy. That would undoubtedly create a sensation. The craze for mummies was triggered by the unearthing of the Lulan beauty from a small river burial site. Even within China, if there were an exhibition, people would line up to see it. That's what we call a business opportunity. After hearing all of this, both Fatty and I were enlightened, nodding our heads in understanding. There were so many layers and intricacies to this business, like uncovering the dialogue through interpretation or enlightenment through flipping a light switch. Knowing that the two jade discs were valued at about 50,000 yuan each was satisfying, as they were difficult trophies to claim, and we felt our efforts had not been in vain. I asked again, Gold Tooth, what did you call this Ming Chi again? Such a tongue twister, isn't it? Gold Tooth refilled my cup with beer. Don't rush, we've got time today. Let me explain slowly. These are called the twin moth-bodied, chi-styled Ming Chi discs. In our line of antique dealing, if an item doesn't have an official name, it is customarily named according to its characteristics. Just like the famous national treasure, the Zhenghui bells, which certainly didn't have that name before. But what they were precisely called in ancient times has become difficult to verify, so archaeologists named them according to the tomb and category of the musical instruments they were found with. These twin moth-bodied chi-styled Ming Chi discs, a name which captures their distinct features, the moth body, shaped like a pair of flying moths. These were unearthed from a Jurchen general's tomb. In ancient times, the moth was seen as a symbol of the self-sacrificing warrior. We have the saying, like a moth to a flame, which conveys the moth's willingness to engage in self-destructive behavior despite knowing the danger. Nowadays, we understand that moths can't see and are drawn to light, but ancient people revered the spirit of these large flying moths. They would fashion accessories in the shape of moths to award to those who demonstrated military prowess as a mark of honor. Look at these patterns on the Ming Chi, Gold Tooth continued. They have a name as well. This is called a Chi pattern, which resembles a lion's head and a tiger's body, but it's actually neither. A Chi is a type of dragon without horns on its head. Objects carved with Chi patterns serve the purpose of warding off evil. Not long ago, a Ming Dynasty prince's tomb was excavated in Yunnan's Mu family mountain. You may have heard of Mu Ying in the Heroes of the Great Ming, a general under Zhu Yuanzhang. The tomb unearthed was that of Prince Mu Ying, and within it were found a pair of jade double Chi bai, similar to these twin moth-bodied, Chi-styled Ming Chi discs. In modern terms, they are akin to medals or military decorations. About this pair, it is essential for them to be a pair since such adornments were meant to be hung on the sides of a helmet. If there's only one, it wouldn't be worth much. Moreover, the value of these twin moth-bodied Chi-styled Ming Chi discs primarily comes from their historical and appreciation value, not so much from their material, which is a type of dry yellow color-changing stone from outside the Caucasus region. Not really jade, but it could be categorized as such, albeit not strictly. The finest quality of this material changes color 12 times, according to the 12 time periods of the day. There are inscriptions here. It looks like a name, Guazimo. It seems the owner of these discs was him, a marshal from the late Jin dynasty, known as the Left Arenga. Legend has it he single-handedly killed over 200 Mongolian soldiers with his strong bow while defending the city. A man of exceptional valor who ultimately died in battle. There's a tale that the Jin emperor paid a ransom of 100,000 taels of gold to retrieve his body from the Mongolians. It felt like I was listening to a myth. There were parts one understood, but not many. Fatty simply stopped listening altogether and instead focused on loading beef tripe, lamb slices, chicken slices, veggies, and mushrooms into the hot pot. We'd eaten enough roasted meats these past few days to grow weary of them. Now, grabbing the opportunity to have a hot pot, Fatty just concentrated on eating. I asked Gold Tooth about the current trends in the antique market and what could fetch a good price. He explained, foreigners call our country ceramics just that, ceramics, and they're always hot items in the antique market. The ceramics produced during China's most glorious historical periods are unmatched even by modern advanced craftsmanship. Have you heard of Changhua porcelain, especially the polychrome ware from that era? It's incredibly valuable. It doesn't have to be big, just tiny like the privates of a 3-year-old child. And once brought to Panjiayuan, it can be worth 100,000 yuan without bargaining. You mentioned that a lot of ceramics and pottery items were found in the tomb at Black Wind Pass on the China-Mongolia border, which is a shame that they didn't come out because those could date back to the late Northern Song period. Not to offend you, but it seems you both might have made a misjudgment this time. As valuable as the twin moth-bodied Qi-styled Ming-Qi discs are, those ceramics and pottery jars you left behind could be worth far more. So, you both still have a lot to learn. Next time I go out to the rural areas to collect items, you should come with me and learn the ins and outs of the trade. Just one successful trip could make you millions. I kept agreeing enthusiastically and said to Gold Tooth that I actually had a bold idea. Next time, we would aim to plunder a really prominent tomb to resolve everything in one go. Tomb raiding in remote mountains was riskier than in developed areas. Even with multiple lives to spare, one wouldn't last long with such risks. I planned to target a grand tomb located at an auspicious feng shui site, but it was not something to be taken lightly. I needed to prepare thoroughly, otherwise, I'd likely be unable to handle it. Gold Tooth asked, "Mr. Hu, are you really planning something big? Have you chosen a target?" I responded, "No, it's just a sudden thought that crossed my mind. Grand tombs in remote areas are incredibly hard to find, and right now, I'm practically like a farmer. Apart from knowing how to observe feng shui and seeking the meridian lines, I'm utterly in the dark when it comes to the historic and archaeological value of such targets. I'm quite blind in selecting them and don't plan to act in the near future." Our actions this time were somewhat eager for quick success, a short-term venture, and I can't keep doing that. However, even though we didn't uncover any major finds in the Northeast this time, we did gain some experience and capital. Think of it as a practice run for tomb raiding. Gold Tooth remarked, "Now that you mention it, I suddenly recall something about Xinjiang.